Haley. And I have started recording, so you may get a notification. Haley?
So my name's Haley Sanford. I do marketing and corporate engagement for Salina Family Healthcare Center. We're a FQHC, which is federally qualified healthcare center in Salina.
Very good.
Is that all the stuff?
Yep. Allison?
Hi, I'm Allison, and I am the president of the board of directors for the Wilson Czech Opera House.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Good morning. I am Lindsay Rumft, and I'm the executive director for Livestock Publications Council. It's an international organization for media that work in the livestock industry, but I work from a co-working space in Cortland, Kansas.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Amanda?
Hi, I'm Amanda Otto, CEO with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Salina.
Thank you. And Blue Rapids Museum.
Hello, I'm Lori Parker. I'm curator and vice president of the Blue Rapids Museum, and I also help with the Blue Rapids Community Foundation, which both of these need desperate training from you guys.
Okay, very good. Well, we will go ahead and get started. I've got a phone in the background that's making noise, and I'm going to share my screen. And for those of you who have not been through presentations with me, can you see the screen okay? Can you see the PowerPoint okay? So I like for this to be engaging. And so certainly if you have any questions, you can feel free to stop me and ask me any questions, because I certainly want you to get out of this, whatever it is that you want to get out of this. And let's see, let me let Danielle in. Danielle? 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 Yeah, let's see. Did she get in okay? Danielle, can you hear me? Oh, Laura, I forgot you. I'm so sorry, Laura. How did I do that? I couldn't see you on my screen. I didn't have the right. Oh, there's Laura.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm Laura Kermer. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for CAP, which stands for Child Advocacy and Parenting Services. We're an organization with 8 different programs serving to the Salina area community to prevent and reduce child abuse.
And you are a member of the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber through the Child Advocacy Centers of Kansas, through CACS, right?
Yes. Because Chris's Place Child Advocacy Center is one of our 8 different programs.
Yes. Danielle, are you there? All right, Danielle, I'd like to have you introduce yourself, but so let's get started. You know, it's kind of interesting because in the work that I've done with nonprofits for so many years, and I figured this is why there were so many people registered for this, is one of the things that I hear quite often is that organizations can't get their boards involved in fundraising, and there seems to be a lot of challenges there. And so I'm excited to kind of talk to you all about things that you can do to get your board involved in fundraising. And let's see, who just jumped on? Can you share your name? Is it Angie?
Hi, Cindy. It's Angie Sanger with Independent Connection.
There's Angie. Thank you, Angie, for joining in today.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. All right, so the first thing that we're going to kind of talk about today is we're going to talk a little bit about fundraising responsibilities, because part of the challenges, I believe, in getting boards involved in fundraising is that sometimes everybody's pointing fingers at everybody else. So they say, well, it's it's not really, some of the board members think it's not really my role to help fundraise, and the executive directors all often looking at the board and saying, well, it is your role. And then maybe the board is saying, well, there's the development directors, just the development director's role. So just kind of understanding whose role it is to fundraise for the organization, because in fact, it's everybody's role to fundraise. So just to kind of review for those of you, because I know some of you have been through some of my other sessions, but really the key roles of the board, of any board, are to kind of set organizational direction, and that might be being engaged in strategic planning, kind of helping decide maybe what programs that the organization should have or shouldn't have. Their role is to provide oversight of the organization. That doesn't mean micromanaging, just some general oversight of what's going on, and then making sure that the organizations have necessary resources. So ultimately, because nobody owns a nonprofit organization, the board is legally and financially responsible. So they need to be sure that they're doing these things. The other things that they need to be doing is making sure that they hire capable leadership. Their role is to hire the executive director. And then it's interesting because I had a meeting 2 days ago. I had a board meeting for a relatively new organization I serve on the board of, and the executive director is getting ready to hire a operations director. And the board was trying to provide a lot of feedback about that operations director. And I reminded them that ultimately, like I can give the executive director some advice, but I just wanted to confirm with the rest of the board that ultimately it's his choice on who he hires. So that's not really their role to hire the people below him. So the board also is responsible for helping to promote the positive public image of the organization and just creating a general awareness of the organization overall, making sure that there is a board in place and you have an adequate number of board members on the board, and that they're recruiting board members and board members who are responsible and committed and engaged. And then ensuring adequate financial resources, which goes back to the fact that the board overall is legally and financially responsible for the organization. So the board's fundraising responsibilities are these things right here. So, the board really understanding, helping to clarify the mission to those outsiders, those potential donors, those prospects that might be willing to give money to the organization. They are responsible as well as I already mentioned, for the finances of the organization. So making sure the organization becomes a sustainable organization that ultimately falls on the board of directors. Identifying strong leadership. So making sure whether it's a strong leader within the board, making sure there's a strong leader within the organization, however that shakes out, they're responsible for doing that. And part of that is making sure that the people on the board, the people within the organization, the executive director have the ability to fundraise. I have seen that within organizations where the executive director didn't want to have any part of fundraising, and that always really worries me as well. They are responsible for approving adequate budgets, and part of that approving adequate budgets means they need to go out and help make sure that that budget and that revenue comes in to meet the budget that they've approved. They need to help plan for the future of their organization, which also ties back to fundraising, because whatever it is you want to grow the organization to be, the board has to be a part of that. They need to be familiar with the overall fundraising plan, and we'll talk more about that later. So that's not just a plan that's developed and given to the executive director, the development director, whoever within the organization to say, okay, here's the plan, go out and make the plan happen. And then of course they have to participate in the whole fundraising process. And hopefully you all received the little checklist that I sent you that we'll go through later. And it'll be interesting to see kind of what the results of that are. Now, the results might be a lot different for what the executive directors answer compared to what your boards answer. Questions before I go on? Nope. So a little bit more about the organization's fundraising responsibilities, or the board's fundraising responsibilities, is the board really needs to be a part of defining what those annual goals are for fundraising. Whether it's 10,000 or 100,000, they need to have some input on that. They need to be looking at the budget and say, oh, in order to meet this budget, if it's, a $300,000 budget or $1 million budget, they need to know and be familiar with and identify what do you need to raise in order to meet the needs of what that budget looks like. And then they need to delegate the responsibilities to meet the goals. And that doesn't mean delegate them all to the executive director. Every board member should be involved in fundraising. So that delegation can be delegation with members of the board. And that delegation should also not just fall to the fundraising committee, but should engage delegating to the entire board. They need to create some fundraising and donor recognition policies. So really being involved and providing input on how the organization recognizes those donors. And I don't know, but I'm curious, what do you all currently do, just any of you, do to recognize donors?
We send handwritten thank you notes to our donors, and then if they donate above a certain threshold, our board members actually call them and give them a personal thank you.
Okay, I like that. Others? Does anybody have does anybody do any recognitions around reaching certain giving levels, lifetime giving levels?
So we do. All of our donors are tied to a specific type of a deliverable. So they might be sponsoring a scholarship or something professional development wise. And in part in doing that, they get something like recognition in our communications efforts, or they might be the title sponsor of something education wise. But we also are joint owners of a national conference. And so a lot of our donors are tied to that conference, and there's specific levels with that event. And all of them come with some type of a deliverable. Sometimes we'll get in-kind sponsors, just the nature of the business we're in.
Yes.
And those folks, we leave it up to them. A lot of times it's in the form of print. And so they actually get some recognition on that print piece. But realistically for us, our donations are very well defined in terms of they're going towards a specific something, and not just, like a sustaining partner where their money just goes in the big bucket.
Okay. So you don't really have any donors that, I'm just curious, that help support just operational funds for the organization?
Not at this time.
Okay.
We return a lot of our funds that are incoming are, returned through professional development. We do have a really large awards contest, and that is a huge revenue driver for us. And so we've looked at trying to monetize that more than just the fees that people pay to enter that awards contest. And that would be in the form of a donor. And that, that would be a lot more along the lines of just going to support some of the operational costs, because it doesn't take a whole lot. I mean, there's a little bit of a cost to pay for the actual physical plaque awards that we get. Beyond that, it's essentially just submitting your entries online and covering a little bit of the overhead costs, but the goal would be that there would be some additional funds that would just go toward the organization.
Sure. So you're kind of fortunate, I guess, because of what you do. You have an opportunity to bring in revenue without, like, I don't know how to, you're bringing in probably a lot of sponsorships, and not every organization is modeled that way, I guess. So
yeah, I would say,
good.
I mean, for us, fundraising by and large is mostly in the form of corporate sponsors
Sponsorships
or partners. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Anybody do a lifetime giving recognition? Or anybody have any questions about what that is? When I worked for Butler Community College, which I worked for 12 years, and I helped their foundation with a lot of things. And every year they had lifetime giving levels. So maybe they were $1,000 and $5,000 and $10,000 and 25 and 50. And so every year it was a way to get donors to continue to keep giving. So every year they recognized people who had reached a new level of giving. And it probably, some of you may have heard this story before, because I worked there. There was another guy there that was the assistant AD, and we had a competitive thing going on to see who could reach which level the fastest. If he gave more than I gave, then I wanted, it was just a competitive thing. But it was really cool to watch those people that had committed really to giving to the foundation over the years give more and more. And maybe they gave, $1,000 a year, but eventually after 10 years, they had given $10,000. So that's kind of a cool thing to watch. The other thing that, Alice, did you have something to say? I noticed you unmuted.
Well, I was just going to say that we have ongoing some monthly donors. We have ones that contribute, just to the general expenses of the center,
Yes.
because that's how we are raised, how we are funded. But we also, in a couple of our fundraising events, we do have sponsorships, and so they can do a certain level of sponsorship. Those are recognized, of course, more. Our individual sponsors, we have not traditionally done a lot. I guess I have struggled a little bit between the privacy of their giving and the recognition. We have a generated receipt from our donor base, our donor program. And then I always write a personal note on that. And then over and above a certain amount, I usually include another letter just with some more specifics about what their gift is going toward. So.
Sure. Thank you for sharing. Thank you all for sharing. So we're going to go on to that. Ensure fundraising methods adhere to ethical standards. It is the board's responsibility to not only make sure and be involved in the development of policies around fundraising. For instance, what kind of donations will you receive? And just making sure. I hear so many things like, I hear, well, can we hire a development director and pay the development director a percentage of what the development director brings in? No, that's considered an unethical practice in fundraising. Same with grant writing and just paying the grant writer a percentage of what grants they bring in. That's considered an unethical practice. The other things around those policies are, I had an issue a couple of years ago where I had an organization that contacted me, and it's a bikers group that does a big wild bikini clad concert party every year. And they use the funds that they raise from that to give to an organization. And they like to give the money to an organization that's tied to children, because that's what they're passionate about. And they called me looking for some help in identifying a nonprofit that would take that money, because several nonprofits had turned them down because they didn't want to tie. And I know there was a couple related to child abuse that they didn't want that tie to this wild drunken party. And so it's, it's important to know whether you'll take donations like that, whether you'll take donations of land or houses or cars or boats or other things that could have some implication for the organization. So having those policies and those ethical standards in place are really important. And the board should be part of that. So I keep having to move you all around on my screen. So individual board member responsibilities. So this is not the board of the whole. This is each individual board member. They are responsible for making a personal contribution to the organization, of a financial contribution, whether it's a small contribution or it's a bigger contribution, because they're expected to give of their time, talent, and treasures. And of course, I'm sure all of you know that you've written grants. If you've written grants, generally grants want to know, do 100% of your board members give something to the organization? So I know I've heard feedback from organizations that my board members think they shouldn't have to give because they give of their time, so they shouldn't have to give of their money. But I can tell you that donation of funds to support the organization really shows the commitment a board member has to that organization. And if they're not willing to donate some sort of financial contribution to the organization, then you have to somewhat question what their commitment is to the mission of the organization and the work that you're doing. So it is really important. It is their role to identify, evaluate, and cultivate prospects. So that doesn't just fall on the staff or the executive director. They need to be providing contacts, helping to engage people in meetings with the executive director, the development director, other people within the organization. They need to be able to give up information about who they know is donating to what or who has the capacity to donate. So it's part of their role to do that work. It is their role to attend face-to-face solicitations. That is part of the board member's role, but we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we identify some strengths of different board members. And then writing appeal letters, they can certainly do that. And even if they don't actually write the letter, even if the executive director or somebody within the organization writes the letter and they sign it and put a little note on it, they can do that as well. It is their role to either organize and or attend the special events, certainly your fundraising events. If you have friend-raising events, they can certainly host fundraising events. And again, we'll talk more about that. And then thanking donors. Any questions about that? Everybody's bored doing all this stuff? Nobody's answering. Okay, I already talked about a little bit about these. Why this seems like a duplicate slide. Why did I make this duplicate slide? So some of the things to think about is not only that making that personal contribution and it being an actual stretch gift. And people have asked, and I don't know if you've ever heard, a stretch gift is if a nonprofit or if a board member gave or committed to giving X amount of dollars to an organization and went home and told their husband or wife, and their husband said, "You did what?" That would be considered a stretch gift. But, if you have a board member that can afford to give, $5,000 and they give $25, that's not considered a stretch gift because it's not going to be difficult for them to give $25. On the other hand, if you engage clients that you serve and they give $10 to the organization and they are really struggling financially, but they're willing to give $10, that is a stretch gift for them. So a stretch gift really is whatever will kind of stretch what you're able to do. just a goal here is raising. So whether it's $5,000 from additional donors, whether it's $2,000 from additional donors, it's always good to kind of set some sort of goal for what kind of money you would like for your board members to raise. And if that's in the form, like in Lindsay's case, of sponsorships, we want each of our board members to try to get 2 sponsorships a year, 5 sponsorships a year, a total sponsorships of $2,500, whatever that is. I think it's always ideal if you can give them some sort of a goal. And when I say you, I don't mean you personally. That really is something that needs to come as a challenge from the board chair, not from the executive director. It's same with that personal contribution, that stretch gift. Ultimately, that ask should come from the chair, not the executive director. Because the executive director has to answer the board, and that somewhat puts them in an odd situation, I guess. Again, attending those special fundraising events and being available to assist with other fundraising efforts. And we'll talk more about that in a bit as well. So I talked a little bit about why board members should give. It does demonstrate that personal commitment. It does. Sorry, I have a young man that works in the office that always yells "bye" when he leaves. It does demonstrate that personal commitment to the organization, to the mission, to the work that the organization is doing. And I work a lot with boards, doing board development with boards that have board members that don't have that commitment to the organization, not just that giving commitment, but just the commitment overall. And they really struggle to do the things that the organization needs to do. They also, when they give, then it encourages other funders to give. So if I told a story, has everybody heard my $30,000 ask story? No, I can't remember who's been on some of my things, but I'm with a coalition here locally, and I went to a group called Grumpy Old Men, and I asked them for $30,000. And Grumpy Old Men would have given me $30,000. They said they'd give me $30,000, but they wanted to know how many people involved with the coalition that I'm involved with give. And there was very few of this entire coalition. And they told me if I could go back and get these coalition members to give a large percentage of them, they'd give me that $30,000. So, you know, that if the board members give, it does encourage other funders to give to the organization. They can say that they gave, and that's an excuse for somebody else to give. It also creates board member ownership of that fundraising overall and bringing in funds into the organization. So I want to share with you just a sample fundraising committee job description. This is for the committee overall. And I don't know if you all have a fundraising committee job description, but it's certainly good to have this in place just so you can share it with the board members and whoever's on the committee. They can understand kind of what their role is to do. And again, when I send this PowerPoint out to you, you'll have this information. But they really should lead the board's participation in the overall fundraising for the organization, the board fundraising. They need to work with the staff to develop the fundraising plan. So even though the fundraising committee needs to be part of developing the plan, what they don't need to do is develop a plan and go back to staff and say, okay, here's the fundraising plan that we developed, and here's your, here's what we want you to go out and do, because they need to be part of that overall effort. And it's a way to just get the board members engaged. They do need to develop those fundraising policies, plans, procedures, and the schedules for the board, not necessarily for the organization overall. Certainly they can set goals for the executive director, things that they want the executive director to do. But the committee needs to be involved with doing these things and involve the staff. Teach board members fundraising skills and techniques. So some of the reasons, probably the biggest reason that nonprofit board members don't get involved in fundraising is because they either don't know what to do, or they think it just consists of going out and making a big ask for thousands and thousands of dollars, which is terrifying. And it's not only terrifying for board members, sometimes it's terrifying for staff or other people, maybe even the executive director. So asking for money is not always an easy thing. And sometimes if you can train those board members, then they can get better at that. It's nice that that fundraising committee, part of their job is to maybe make a recommendation of a minimum board member contribution. Some organizations have a minimum requirement, some don't, some just say that stretch gift. And there's ups and downs to identifying a minimum board member contribution, because for some board members, for instance, here at the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, our board members, they have to be members, but we ask them to contribute $250 a year. They want to contribute less, that's fine. We allow that. We just give them a pledge form. They know when they sign onto the board that we hope that they'll give $250 a year to the organization. And we give them a pledge form every year at the beginning of the year, and they can fill that pledge form out, and they can, and then they return it, and they can pledge the $250, or they can pledge $100, or they can pledge $500. The downside to that $250 is there's probably some on our board that could pledge $500 that have decided, because $250 is what we asked, that's all they're going to pledge. So that's the downside to that requirement. And we don't hold the feet to the fire. If they can't give $250, that's fine. But we do want to show at the end of the year that 100% of our board gave financially, and we'll invoice that to them. If they want to be invoiced every month, every quarter, whatever that looks like. If they say, well, I want to give $250, but I can't give it in the first quarter, we invoice me in the second quarter for the full amount, we give them that option. They can fill all that out. And we recently established a Venmo link. So if they want to give it via Venmo, that was per the board's request, they can do that too. And then identifying, soliciting contributions from the board members. That's part of the role of the fundraising committee or the chair, and lead the board's effort in identifying, cultivating, and approaching major donors. So this is a sample of what the fundraising committee should be responsible for doing. Any questions about that? Everybody raise your hand if you have one of these in place. I'm not seeing any hands. Okay. So here's just a sample development director job description, just so you can kind of see what the difference is. Do any of you all have a development director? I see one head shaking no. Anybody else? Let's see what's in the chat. No, Alice says no. Laura says it's split between me and the exec. Haley says no. Okay, for when the day comes that, for those of you who don't have a development director and you get one, you can hang on to this sample development director job description. So they will work with the board and chief executive to develop the long-term strategy. You notice that they don't say that they develop it by themselves, because it is a shared role. Then they help to organize and execute the fundraising programs, but they do that with the assistance of the fundraising committee. Develop relationships with funders. So your board, while your board can help develop relationships with funders, and they should, your development director, and sometimes this falls just to the executive director, would have more time. I say that. I know that we're all stretched for time in the nonprofit world. to go out and develop those strong relationships, but it's good to have the board involved in that as well. Coordinate visits by staff and the board members, plan and oversee donor recognition and cultivation. And they can do that in conjunction with the board, and work with staff to design promotional materials for fundraising. Unless you've got a graphic designer on your board or somebody that's really good at that, please don't have them do that. And if you don't have a development director, then I'm sad to say to all the executive directors, CEOs on this Zoom call, this stuff falls to you. Man, I'm struggling with getting to my PowerPoint to, I don't know if it's froze. Come on, PowerPoint. Bear with me a second. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, there we go. So other typical fundraising duties of the chief executive, you're going to serve as the organization's main representative for funders, for grant organizations, for the community overall. You might possibly want to serve as the primary contact for donors, because that is the thing about getting board members involved. You do need to still always have that primary contact that donors can, if they've got a question, they suddenly want to donate. They don't want to have a whole list of board members and have to choose who they're ultimately going to call, unless they just have, happen to have a friendship with one of them, and then they make that connection. And then making sure that you are in compliance with those grants and any of the regulatory requirements. And, if somebody's giving you money and it's supposed to be restricted funds, that it's used in that way. So that all falls to the executive director. All right, let's talk a little bit about giving. So there's certain reasons why people give to the organizations. They feel a connection to the organization. Maybe their peers are giving. Someone asked them to give. I don't know if you all know that the biggest reason people don't give is because they're simply just not asked. Some people give because they just want to make a difference. And some people, again, goes back to that competitive, like between me and the assistant AD with the Butler Community College Foundation. Some just have a lot of money and they want to share that money with things that they're passionate about sharing it. Some people give to nonprofits because they want that recognition. And sometimes companies, banks, they're good at that. They just want to get their name out there, and they do that. They'll give an amount and they're recognized. On the other hand, there are places and people and businesses that give to organizations and they don't want any recognition. So it's important for you all to find out from your donors, do they want that recognition or not? If you apply for a grant from Walmart, they want to know what all kinds of recognition they're going to get. Some just want to make sure that the organization can fulfill their mission. They like what the organization is doing. They think it's important work, and they want to help with that work. Some give because they have to give for tax reasons. They need to give away so much money every year. And I wish I had that problem, that I just needed to give away so much money every year in order to reduce my taxes. And then I don't know if any of you, along the line of tax reasons, I don't know if any of you have ever used tax credits, but I know I personally like to buy tax credits if those are available with a nonprofit organization, because back to Butler Community College, when they were building their new ag barn, they had tax credits available. So I could give them $1,000. I could get $750 back in tax credits. And so the cost of my $1,000 donation was only $250, but I was able to help them. So I love tax credits. If you're not familiar with those, you should certainly check into them for your organization. And some are just to ensure their pet project finds a home. And I know we have a museum here locally that I serve on the advisory board of. And these people that started this museum just had a huge collection of artifacts and really cool stuff. The Museum of World History is what it's called. And they had collected for years and years, had traveled all over the world, and they helped to start this museum because they just wanted a place to put all of these artifacts that they knew that eventually they were going to pass away, and these artifacts weren't going to have a home. So a lot of that museum's made up of those artifacts. So sometimes people just want to find a home for their pet project. So why did they not give? Well, they haven't, there's no solicitation happening within your organization. They really don't understand how their gift is going to make a difference for the organization. They don't feel wanted or needed. They don't receive a direct appeal or personalized appeal. I wouldn't send out an appeal letter that says, "Dear sir," or "Dear madam," ever. It would always need to be addressed to them personally. They have an unacknowledged gift in the past. So I have heard from people over the years that said they gave a sizable amount to an organization and never heard back from the organization. And that's a really big mistake. You cannot acknowledge that gift enough. And there's that they were not asked to give. They didn't give because they just simply weren't asked. So you have to at least ask. Maybe the timing wasn't right. Maybe we've just come through 2 years of COVID and they've been hit financially and it just isn't a good time for them to give. I think we saw a lot of that certainly in 2020. And then the mission of your organization is not compelling. All right, we're going to pull out our checklist because this is where we're going to really kind of look to get on board with how we really get those boards involved in fundraising or those individual board members. So I'm just going to go through this quiz. Hopefully you pull out your pieces of paper because I want you to keep track. And the reason I want to go through this exercise with you is because this is an excellent exercise to do with your board of directors. It does a couple of things. It identifies some things that maybe they hadn't thought about that they could do to get involved in fundraising. But beyond that, it also identifies where they fall in these categories. So where can you get them started and how can you move those board members from doing the first section, which is building the foundation, to the last, which is solicitation. So I'm going to read out the statements, and you are going to either put a Y for yes, an N for no, or M for maybe. And maybe you do this maybe from the perception of a board member if you're executive director, or maybe you can just do it and find out where you're at in this whole process. So let's get started. How many are you willing to undertake? Are you willing to commit to the organization's vision and mission and be willing to learn more about how to give and get contributed resources? Yes, no, or maybe. Are you willing to aid in the creation of the fund development plan? Understand the plan's implications, be willing to help execute it. Decide on a realistic budget allocation for the organization's fundraising program. Understand the organization's financial situation and probable future funding position. Evaluate progress by asking friendly but searching questions like, are we doing what we agreed to do? If not, why not? Are we getting improved results as time goes on? And so on. And are you willing to undertake approving the creation or revision of a board member statement of responsibilities that includes clearly defined expectations for their personal giving and involvement in fundraising. So you're going to go back, and I'm just be curious about your scores. Maybe a few of them you can share them. So if you get 2 points for each yes, how many points do you have for this section?
Well, answering this from my perspective, of course, as director and the responsible person for development.
Yep.
I have 12.
Okay. Looks like we have 8 in the chat and 12 in the chat. Anybody else want to share?
I put 8 simply because many of these are already in my job description. So those I have already applied yes to, but 2 of them really kind of fall on the executive director and others on the leadership team. So they're kind of like maybes for me, depending on how much of it actually falls under the umbrella of my work.
Yep. Makes sense. Allison, are you still on here? I can't stretch out where I can see everybody. Nope. I wanted to hear from Allison. I was curious what she said. All right. Good job. We're going to go on to the next section. Which is friend raising. And this actually, there's 2 slides on this one because, and you'll see that on your checklist as well. So it's a little bit longer. So are you willing to provide the names and addresses of donor prospects for the development mailing list? That means sharing information about your contacts, that kind of stuff. Research phone numbers or secure exact addresses for campaign mailings. Attend training workshops to discover how better to carry out your role and to augment the overall development process. Prepare useful and informative training materials for board members and other volunteers about how to raise funds. Advocate for the organization or cause and serve as an enthusiastic community relations rep. Acquire mailing lists from a variety of sources in the community to augment the organization's database. Facilitate introductions and access to individuals or groups where you have credibility and influence, and nurture prospects and donors on a regular basis. Everybody get all these answered? Okay, we're going to go to the next slide to finish this section on friend raising. Well, that's crazy. Where did my slide go? I'm going to blame it on the snow, I guess. I don't understand that. Oh my goodness. Okay. Sorry. All right, you all read your papers and go through the next sections while I fix my PowerPoint. I don't know what's going on. Did you all get through that next section? I'm reopening my PowerPoint. Just one second. So what did you all score? You had to give yourself one for every yes on that second section. So what were your scores?
I scored a 20, but I was trying to really take this from how I think a board member might respond to these questions.
Yep.
So it's only half of the questions that I was able to put a yes.
Yes. It's interesting if you look at it from a board member's perspective compared to yours, right?
Right. Unfortunately, I didn't have to put an N on anything, but the others were maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I generally, when I do this with boards, I see a lot of maybes.
Mm-hmm.
What about the rest of you?
I feel like fundraising is the part that I'm the most comfortable in doing. I'd like to say I got 100%, but we don't have a database, so I don't have anything to put this in yet.
Yes.
So it kind of raised my question. Is there a database anybody recommends?
What programs are you all using for databases for your fundraising?
We're using Excel right now. We're small enough that we don't have the resources to purchase something like, I was trying to remember the one that we used to use at my previous organization. Can't remember the name of it.
We manage about everything we do here at the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber with a program called Podio, which is not specific to fundraising, but it is a program management software that you can manage everything imaginable with. And the interesting thing about Podio is that you only pay per paid staff. That's what you pay per month. And so it's been pretty reasonably cost for us. But we can do so many things with it that we've not reached out to a fundraising software, but I've heard of Donor Perfect and Little Green Light, Little Green Tree. I don't know. Anyway,
Bloomerang is the one I think we use.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot. And there's a lot of them that are really expensive too.
We
I can also hear from Lori in the chat. She got 12 and she's feeling tired from all that she's supposed to do. Well, you're not supposed to do that by yourself. That's what the board. All right, let's move in. Let's move out of fundraising then, and then let's look at level 3, which is a solicitation.
Hey, Cindy.
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering on question number 12. It says acquire mailing lists from a variety of sources in the community to augment the organization's database.
Yep.
So could you talk about your experience with that a little bit and your suggestions?
Well, so I can. So there is, you can buy mailing lists either online, you can buy them from a mail house. We used to subscribe when I worked at Butler. We subscribed to a particular, I can't even think of what the name of it was. We could create our own mailing list, but also just creating mailing list, just like you do with your databases. If you've got organizations, and when I say organizations, sometimes a chamber, if you're a member of a chamber, will share their mailing list, or you can have access like the nonprofit chamber and our regional chamber here, we exchange memberships. And so I can get into their membership database and potentially create some prospects from that.
Mhm.
But asking other people like what kind of mailing lists that they have.
Angie,
They might
if
be
you're a
willing to
member
do.
of the Salina Chamber, you can buy theirs for $30, and they have 1,300 members that you could
Okay.
get.
That's good. That's good to know. Yeah.
Thank you, Haley.
Any other questions about that second part? So on solicitation level 3, are you willing to contact local businesses and vendor suppliers to seek in-kind donations, supplies, equipment, those types of things? Are you willing to personalize the annual direct mail program or other endorsed campaign by using at least 2 of the following techniques? Hand address envelopes for top donors, add a personal PS or a thank you, compose and send your note of appreciation for a gift. Phone someone to thank them. Are you willing to increase your donation each year to help reach the goal and assist in setting the pace for others so that you will become a credible solicitor? So you can say, I gave X amount of dollars. Would you give the same? Are you willing to request a pledge or a contribution from designated prospects or lapsed donors? Are you willing to solicit a cash contribution from a service club, civic group, church, temple, something like that? And are you willing to ask selected individuals for a specific gift or a multi-year pledge? Visit them personally, accompanied by a staff member or another volunteer. So you're going to give yourself 2 points for each yes. So now that we've gone through each of these 3 sections and we've looked at the 3 kind of stages of fundraising, which are building the foundation, fundraising, and doing the actual solicitation, where did you get the most amount of points?
I had the most amount of points in the building the foundation, but I
Okay,
was taking it from the perspective of a board member that I feel like we've had, a good, quite a few conversations around fund development and resource development.
yes.
So building the foundation was a 12 and the others were 10s.
Alice said, should donors have access to individual donor amounts, or is that information considered private? Yeah, I think your board can have access to that. I don't think other donors specifically need to have access to, unless somebody wants to, unless the donor wants to share that information.
I've seen ranges like
Yes,
$25 to $49 or 50 to 100, and people are listed in those categories and like an
Yes.
annual report.
Yep. I've seen on annual reports where actual donations were listed, but I think that, that should depend on whether or not you've got permission from that donor to allow that information to be shared.
I apologize. I did mistype that. I was distracted when I was typing that. I did mean should board have access to individual donor amounts.
Boards generally will have access to that, and that's part of all of the fundraising. Because if a board member doesn't know that a particular donor is giving $100 and can give feedback about, well, that donor is giving $100, but they have the capacity to give 500 or 1,000, they can't provide that feedback unless they know. So it's, and the other thing is, I think it's really important, really, well, I guess I'm kind of repeating myself, for them to be able to provide that feedback. So.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Where'd the rest of you all fall in this?
I definitely like, I'm most comfortable participating probably fundraising, but again, all
Fundraising.
of these kind of tend to fall under my actual job description.
Yes.
So I feel like I have to do all of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So it would be pretty common when you give this to boards that you will find more people that fall into that fundraising, into the building the foundation. You'll probably find the most will fall into the building the foundation. You'll probably find a few that will fall into the fundraising, and maybe a couple that'll fall into the solicitation section. And again, there's several reasons why I take people through this process, why I go through this process with boards even, and why you should consider going through this process with your board. Number one, if we go back and you look at your list, these are all the different ways board members can get involved. And sometimes they don't realize there's a lot of ways that they can get involved in fundraising. When they think about fundraising for the organization, they think they have to be the person that goes out and makes the ask, and that terrifies them. So in order to engage them in some part of your fundraising, these are the things that you can engage them in, with the goal of getting them comfortable with building the foundation and doing those things, and then offering training or insight or input or some sort of board development that helps them move into that next section. And you ultimately hope to get where you have a number of different board members at level 3 where they're willing to solicit. And the other thing, when I teach about developing the nonprofit board and developing that ideal board and doing a board gap analysis, if you don't have people that do fall into this level 3 solicitation, you probably should consider, as you board members term out and you bring new board members on, that you kind of evaluate whether or not those are the people that would be willing to do some solicitation. Because going back to that number one reason that people don't give is because they're not asked. Somebody has to be making the ask. And it shouldn't always just be the executive director, the development director. You've got to eventually engage your board in making those asks. But you also have to show them all the other ways they can begin to get involved in fundraising. So they're not just thinking, if I get involved in fundraising, I'm just going to have to be out there all the time making asks, and I don't want to ask for money. So I hope that you'll use this tool to go through with them and kind of find out where they can become engaged, or have the fundraising committee, if you've got a fundraising committee, go through this exercise. And then you can match those board members right now with what they're most comfortable doing. If they're most comfortable with doing building the foundation, let them help to build the foundation. This process is gonna help them to identify where their strengths are. Questions about that? Yes, I will be sending out the slides. Any other questions?
Cindy, I had a question.
Yes.
We did a skills and interest discussion at our most recent board meeting and identified two categories, or skills and interests for board recruitment.
Yes.
And resource development and fundraising was one of them. And so then it was really, we didn't have as much of a fruitful discussion about who in our service area we feel like would have those skills.
Right.
Or skills and experience and interest. So do you have any ideas on, I guess I would say one of the things I was thinking about was reaching out to other nonprofits in the area to find out if they've had a previous board member who's
Yes.
had that expertise.
Yep.
But do you have any other ideas to be really kind of thinking about generating some ideas for potential board members?
Yeah, I think reaching out to the other boards is a great idea. I think reaching out, and I don't know if any of you use LinkedIn, but sometimes you can find some of the profiles from people on LinkedIn that you might be able to relate to what you do. So if they've done business development, if they've done sales, if they've done, and sometimes they'll just list on there, they've been involved with organizations, they helped with a capital campaign, they helped raise funds for a nonprofit they're involved with. Sometimes, in smaller communities, like again, when I was involved with the Butler Community College Foundation, you could kind of, as you got to know people around town, you got to know who those people were that weren't afraid to go out and ask for money for nonprofit organizations. You can also look at, if you know of any organizations that have been involved in capital campaigns, who's been on their capital campaign teams. So those are a few ways, but certainly have those discussions with potential board members when you're interviewing them or whatever. You have a meeting with them to kind of discuss the organization. That's certainly something that you could be frank with them about and just find out, how do they feel about that overall. Other questions? All right, so we're going to go into a few stages, the stages of fundraising, because these are the stages of fundraising I think are really important for you to kind of share with those people on your board. Maybe they just, again, don't have a full understanding of the process. And again, this relays back to the exercise that we just did. So stage one of your fundraising, and this is probably old information for you all, but I would like for you to think of it from the perspective of how in each of these stages that we discuss and the exercise you just did, how you can get your board engaged. So that stage one is the cultivating and the identifying prospects. So making sure that you're reaching out to the board members, having them provide some of their contacts that they think might have an interest in the organization that you're doing, so you can help to build your prospect list. That's part of the cultivation process, is a good way to get your board engaged. Building those relationships with a prospect, so getting board members to be willing to say, hey, I've got somebody that I've talked to about the organization. Let's go have coffee so they can meet you and we can share more about the organization. You can share more about the organization. You can do it together. And that also goes along with generating the interest in the organization. So as you educate those potential donors, those people that you're meeting with, as the board educates them about all the services that an organization does, that provides, the people that you serve, the stories that you can tell, that helps to all generate interest in the organization, as well as the history, the programs, all of those different things. So that's all part of your cultivation process. And each one of these are areas that the board can get involved with that, in my opinion, shouldn't be too very intimidating. It's just about building relationships. They don't have to make an ask in this stage. I missed stage two. We just skip right to stage two. Stage three. No, back to stage two. So presenting the organization's case statement, that might be informational about the organization and why people should give, what the vision is for the organization. Certainly participating in a one-on-one solicitation. So when a board member gets to phase two, when they get to that section that we talked about, and they're involved in fundraising, it might be great to engage them in going along on an ask and not having to make the ask, but just letting them go along and see how an ask goes. What does that process look like? That might take away some of the fear. And I think the more passionate any of us are, whether it's a board member, the executive director, or whoever, the more passionate they are about the organization's mission, a little bit easier it gets to actually make that solicitation, to make that ask. They can help with sending direct mail pieces with personalized notes. And I tell a story about another board that I served on where every month when we came to the board meeting, there was some thank you cards laid out, and we could all look for whoever's name that we knew on those cards and pull them out, sign our names, write a little note. They could, same with appeals, we could sign those appeal letters. Also making telephone solicitations. That's part of that solicitation process. And then there's the stage 3, which is the stewardship, and that is the thanking of the donors and making your board members aware that if they see a donor, that they're at a networking event, they're at a chamber event, they're at church or whatever, just to remind them that they really appreciate the fact that they made a donation. Every touch point with potential donor, doesn't always have to be about the ask. Sometimes it's just about thanking them for the ask. Sometimes it's just about making a phone call and just reminding them of what the organization's doing currently, and just telling thanks for supporting us in the past. That's all of, that all helps to steward that donor. Donor recognition and activities, we talked about that a little bit earlier. Maybe sending donors invitations to special events. I know that some of the boards that I served on, I was on the board of an organization over in Butler County with Sunlight Children's Services, and we built a new children's home in Andover, and we had a special open house specifically for donors that, they got to feel special, and we had more food than what we had at the regular grand opening, just whatever we could do to make them feel special. And then again, just providing updates for the organization. Your board members can certainly do that easy enough, but maybe they just don't know what it is that they can do to assist. So we have to take on, or get our fundraising committee to take on, educating them. Okay. My PowerPoint froze up again. All right. So getting them involved, getting the board members, another way to get the board members involved in that cultivation is having them make personal contacts with prospects. We talked a little bit about that. Showing the prospects the facilities. So if you've got facilities and they will invite somebody in to show them the facilities, that's great. When we opened the children's home in Andover, each of the board members agreed to do some sort of an introduction. So I invited 5 of my friends to come to the children's home in Andover. I bought them lunch and learn more about the children's home over there and take them on a tour. Every one of us were challenged with inviting 5 friends to come in and take a tour of that children's home and just learn more. And there wasn't any of them any of those friends that we brought in that participated that weren't just, that really impacted their hearts just to see and hear the stories about the children that were served in that children's home. Certainly they can share the history of the organization, just so the people that they have contacts with, those prospects, know about the history of their organization. and certainly sharing their enthusiasm for the mission and the work that the organization does. If a board member can get excited and share that excitement and that passion with the prospect, that's fantastic. So another way that the board members can get involved in solicitation, helping to write that case statement, which we talked about, focusing on the results, not the organization's needs. They can include clear, essential facts, and then they have that connection to the community. All of those ways they can get involved. And then let's talk a little bit about making the ask. So if you'll educate them when they get to this point about what those steps look like, I wouldn't ever recommend that you just ask every board member on your board to go out and solicit. Some people just aren't and will never be made to solicit. They're too nervous. They don't present well. And I hope that exercise that I gave you will help you identify who those people are and who those people that you might be able to take to the next level. But just don't ever have the expectation that everybody on your board, you're going to get everybody on your board to solicit, because you likely aren't. But when you train them, you can train them about making sure that the prospect knows that they're coming. So you're not doing cold calls. Cold calls are never good for soliciting donors. Make sure that you're enthusiastic, or they're enthusiastic, and they know a little bit about the interest of the prospect. And I'm curious, for those of you who maybe are in the process of cultivating relationships with donors or have done that work, what kind of things do you do to kind of learn a little bit more about that prospect and their interest?
I'll either just ask, or I'll do a little bit of internet sleuthing.
Yes. We're so lucky that we have the internet, because we can find out so much about people. And I do that before I'm going to meet with certain people. I go to LinkedIn, or I go to Facebook, or I just Google their name and I learn a little bit about what they've been doing and those kinds of things, so that I can have specific questions or specific things to talk to them about. So we're so lucky that we have that, because many years ago, when I first started my career, actually in marketing and business development, I didn't have that tool. So I'm so grateful for it now. Other ways that people do that, or other suggestions?
I guess one more, my family's lived in the area for a while. So if I have a hunch that my grandma might know something about somebody, I'll call my grandma or the corresponding family member.
Yes, that's a good idea too. So then the other thing is bringing a staff member along. So that's another reason why you don't want that board member to specifically go out and ask by themselves. If you've got a staff person along, if you've got the executive director along, somebody that can answer questions that the board member's not going to know. Because unfortunately, board members, while they may be engaged with our organizations and they know some high-level stuff possibly about our organizations, hopefully about our organizations, they're not there on a day-to-day basis. And so they're not always going to be able to answer the questions in the way that a staff member can answer the questions. And then researching the donor's giving history to determine the appropriate amount to ask for. That's a little bit more difficult to do. I know that there's software out there that you can learn more about some of the big donors out there and what they give. I tell people to watch for events, watch for ads about events, watch for any kind of thing that gives you an idea of what an organization and or an individual might be giving to, and or that will give you any information about how much they're giving. Again, those annual reports are a great way to find out. And for those of you who have not used 990s, organizations 990s as a tool that often lists some of those bigger donors, you can go up to the IRS website and you can do nonprofit lookup, and you can look up any nonprofit organization in this country, and you can go look at their 990, unless they've done a 990N, which is for organizations that make $50,000 or less in revenue. You can go up and look at who their biggest donors are and how much money that they've given. So that information is public. But it's always a good idea to know how much, what's a good amount of money to ask for. You don't want to ask somebody for $50,000 that really only has the capacity to give 5. You also don't want to ask somebody that can give 50 for 5. Okay, so here's some just some other ways that how board members can get involved in stewardship, which we've talked about some of these. Send letters of appreciation, invitations to special events from that board member, not from the executive director. They can send an email, they can send a note. They can help you maintain those relationships with the donors. So certainly if you have a board member that's made an introduction to the organization and you've gone out and the two of you have met with that donor, you can go do that again, or they can do it for you to take some of the stuff off of your plate. But maintaining those relationships with those donors, board members are great about. It's a great thing for them to do. Personally thanking those donors again, I mentioned some ways to do that. And then keeping donors connected to the organization. So giving them updates, inviting them to those fundraising events, inviting them to friendship things, inviting them to the picnic, whatever it is that they can think of to keep donors connected to the organization. Board members are certainly, it's a good role for them. So also, it's important for you to share with your board members, there is going to be rejection. Anytime you make an ask, at some point in time, there's going to be rejection. And you have to teach them when you're moving them to that third level that they just can't take that personally. It isn't anything personal about them, that it could be that it's just not a good time to ask. Again, if we looked at 2020 specifically, the board member might have experienced more rejection than they might have experienced in 2019. So you just can't take it personally. It isn't personal, and you have to train the board members that. And sometimes you have to train your own staff about that as well. You just can't take it personally. And even if somebody says no, sometimes that just means no, not right now. It's certainly appropriate to ask that person that you're meeting with, that prospective donor, can I check back with you in 6 months? Can I check back with you next year? Just to keep that door open, but not just to take no as all it means forever no. And then that helps to keep that door open. You can also teach them how to offer additional information that might change the donor's mind, maybe some stories that they can share about the people that you serve or the work that the organization does and how you're really making an impact in the community. It's so interesting because going back to that about why donors give, they give for different reasons. So you have to learn to appeal to whatever that reason is that they're giving. And, if somebody was to say, well, Cindy, I want, the Butler Community College Foundation was saying, well, I would like for you to give $250 more because Matt is going to give, he's going to give X amount of dollars, then I would be given for competitive reasons. But there's just different reasons that people give. So making sure you know what those are. And then finally, the overall fundraising secrets of success to share with your board members. You've got to know the mission of the organization. The board members have to learn that well, which is why it's so important to have a short, concise mission statement that the board members can learn and or at least get the gist of. You need to know the goals of the organization. Where does the organization want to go? How do you want to grow? How many more people do you want to serve? Do you want a building in a year that can serve more people? What are the goals? They need to know how to make that ask. And they need to, they'll have to overcome their fears in asking. If you don't overcome those fears, then you'll probably never ask, which says if you don't ask, you won't receive. The only way to fail is by not trying. So that's it. I've got a few minutes to questions. If anybody has any questions, hopefully this information was helpful and helps you to think through the ways that you can get your board involved in fundraising for your organizations.
Thank you, Cindy, for the helpful information and the checklist too.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
that.
And again, I will send out this PowerPoint. Any other questions or comments? Nope. Well, thank you all for participating today. I always enjoy spending the time with you sharing, and I'm here for you. If you've got any questions or any ways that I can help, I'm always happy to do so. And with that, if there's nothing else, I wish you all a wonderful day.